Get out. The decorated Navy SEAL growled from the shadows of his living room. He was sitting in a wheelchair, completely broken, ready to sign away all his medical benefits just to hide his shame. But as the home care nurse packed her bag to leave for good, a small blur darted past her. His 5-year-old daughter shoved the heavy front door closed and slammed the deadbolt shut, locking them inside. With tears streaming down her face, the little girl screamed, "You promised! You said you would dance with me on Friday." In that one heartbreaking second, the nurse realized the hardened sniper wasn't an angry monster at all. He was just a terrified father, who knew he was about to break his little girl's heart. "Get out." The voice came from the shadows of the living room. It wasn't a yell. It was a flat, low command, vibrating with the kind of practiced authority that usually made people step back. Nora Hayes did not step back. She stood quietly in the entryway, her physical therapy bag resting against her hip. The suburban house felt less like a home and more like a bunker. The heavy curtains were drawn tight against the mid-morning sun. The air smelled of stale coffee, dust, and the sharp, sterile scent of rubbing alcohol. In the center of the gloom sat Jace Carter, 34 years old, former Navy SEAL sniper. 6 months ago, an improvised explosive device had taken his right leg just below the knee. Now, he sat rigidly in a standard-issue wheelchair, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. He was wearing faded sweatpants and a dark t-shirt. His jaw was covered in a heavy shadow of stubble, but his eyes were entirely alert. They tracked Nora with cold, mechanical precision. "I told the VA yesterday," Jace said, his tone perfectly level. "I told them again this morning. I don't need a home care nurse. I don't need a babysitter. And I definitely don't need whatever motivational speech you have prepared. The door is behind you." Nora looked at him. She had read his file. 3 combat tours. Highly decorated. 0 cooperation with physical therapy since his discharge. "I don't give motivational speeches, Mr. Carter," Nora said. Her voice was calm, completely devoid of the pity he was clearly bracing for. "I give exercises. And according to your file, if you refuse treatment for another week, your insurance drops your coverage entirely." Jace's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly. "Then let them drop it," I said. "Get out." Before Nora could answer, a small shadow moved in the hallway. A little girl stepped into the dim light of the living room. She was 5 years old, wearing mismatched socks and an oversized superhero t-shirt. She didn't run to her father. She didn't hide behind his chair. Instead, Lily Carter walked directly to the space between Nora and the wheelchair. She crossed her thin arms over her chest, planted her feet firmly on the hardwood floor, and glared up at the stranger. She looked exactly like her father, guarded, defiant, ready for a fight. Nora felt a sudden, quiet ache in her chest. She had worked with dozens of wounded veterans, but this was different. This wasn't just a man refusing to heal. This was a man forcing his 5-year-old daughter to stand guard over his broken dignity. Jace's expression flickered when he saw his daughter. The iron wall cracked, just for a fraction of a second, replaced by a deep, exhausted guilt. "Lily," Jace said softly, "go back to your room, honey. The lady is just leaving." Nora set her heavy bag down on the floor. It landed with a solid thud. She wasn't going anywhere. The sound of the heavy canvas bag hitting the floor seemed to echo in the quiet room. Jace gripped the cold metal wheels of his chair. His jaw muscles worked visibly under his stubble. "Are you deaf?" I said. "The door is behind you." "I heard you, Mr. Carter," Nora said, unzipping the top of her bag. "You have excellent projection. But the Department of Veterans Affairs authorized a 1-hour physical therapy session today. If I leave now, I have to file a refusal of care report. And we both know what happens to your benefits if I do that." Jace's eyes narrowed into dark slits. He was used to doctors sighing and walking away. He was used to nurses offering sympathetic smiles before retreating. He was not used to a woman in practical navy blue scrubs standing in his living room, completely unbothered by his anger. Before Jace could fire back another warning, Nora did something that caught him completely off guard. She turned away from him entirely. She crouched down, bringing herself exactly to eye level with the 5-year-old girl standing like a shield in front of the wheelchair. Lily didn't step back, but her small shoulders tensed. "Hi," Nora said gently, keeping her voice even. "I'm Nora." Lily frowned, her chin jutting out in a perfect imitation of her father. "My dad said leave." "I know he did," Nora replied. "He has a very loud voice. But I have a job to do. I help people fix their muscles when they get stuck." Nora didn't use baby talk. She didn't smile an overly bright, fake smile. She just looked at the little girl with quiet respect. "You're doing a really good job protecting him," Nora continued, glancing at Lily's defensive stance. "But he's going to need to stretch his shoulders today. And he can't do that if you're standing right in front of the wheels. Do you think you could watch from the sofa? Just to make sure I do my job right?" Lily blinked. Adults usually ignored her or told her to go play. No one had ever asked her to supervise. She looked back at her father, uncertain. Jace sat frozen. The anger in his chest had suddenly been replaced by a tight, uncomfortable knot. He swallowed hard. "Lily," he said, his voice dropping its sharp edge. "Go sit on the couch." "It's fine." Lily hesitated, then slowly shuffled over to the faded sofa, climbing up but keeping her eyes locked on Nora. Nora stood back up. She walked over to the nearest window and pulled the heavy curtain back just 2 inches. "Don't touch that," Jace snapped. Nora dropped her hand. But the thin slice of sunlight had already done its job. It cut across the dusty hardwood floor, illuminating a dark corner of the room. There, leaning against the wall, was a state-of-the-art prosthetic leg. The carbon fiber socket was immaculate. The mechanical joint was perfectly aligned, and the entire thing was covered in a thick, gray layer of dust. It clearly hadn't been touched in weeks. Nora looked at the dusty prosthetic, and then she looked directly into Jace Carter's defiant eyes. "Well," Nora said quietly, "since you aren't using your hardware, we'll start with upper body mobility." "Lean forward," Nora instructed, her voice entirely strictly professional. Jace gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, not moving. "My leg is gone, not my spine. My back is fine." "You sit in that chair 14 hours a day," Nora replied, calmly taking a clipboard from her bag. "Your hip flexors are tightening, which pulls on your lower back, which compromises your core. If you want to transfer to a bed or a shower chair without tearing a rotator cuff, you need to stretch. Lean forward." For a long moment, Jace just stared at her. He was waiting for her to back down, but Nora didn't blink, and she didn't apologize. Slowly, with a tight exhale through his nose, he bent at the waist. "Good," Nora said. She crouched slightly to check the alignment of his spine. As she lowered herself, her line of sight shifted toward the faded sofa where Lily was sitting. The little girl's legs were swinging back and forth, but Nora's attention was caught by a flash of color underneath the furniture. Pushed far back into the shadows, barely visible behind the wooden legs of the couch, was a pair of shoes. They were tiny, covered in bright red sequins. Mary Jane's with little black bows on the straps. Nora paused for half a second. It was a microscopic hesitation, but Lily noticed. The 5-year-old stopped swinging her legs. She scrambled off the cushions, dropped to her knees, and reached under the sofa. She pulled the sparkly red shoes out and clutched them tightly against her superhero t-shirt. "They're for Friday," Lily said. Her voice was quiet, but fiercely defensive. "You can't touch them." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Nora looked up at Jace. The rigid, angry soldier was gone. Jace's shoulders had slumped. He closed his eyes, and a muscle in his jaw twitched violently. When he opened his eyes again, he refused to look at Nora. He stared blankly at the wall. "Lily," Jace said. His voice sounded hollow, scraped clean of all its previous authority. "Take the shoes to your room. Put them in the closet." "But..." "Now, Lily." The little girl bit her lip, clutching the shoes tighter, before turning and running down the hallway. Her footsteps faded, followed by the quiet click of a bedroom door shutting. Nora stayed kneeling on the floor. She looked at Jace's averted face. Then she glanced at the dusty, untouched prosthetic leg sitting in the corner of the room. Today was Monday. The pieces clicked together in her mind. The heavy curtains, the aggressive refusal of care, the thick layer of dust on a piece of equipment designed to help a man walk. Jace Carter wasn't just struggling with general depression. He was anticipating a very specific failure. Something was happening on Friday. Something involving his daughter, a pair of red dancing shoes, and a promise he knew he couldn't keep. Nora stood up slowly. She didn't ask about Friday. She didn't offer a sympathetic smile. "All right, Mr. Carter," Nora said softly. "Let's fix those shoulders." By 8 o'clock that evening, the predicted storm had arrived. Rain lashed against the front windows, and thunder rattled the bunker-like house. Nora was still there. Jace had spent 3 hours trying to ignore her presence, but the storm had given her a legitimate reason to stay. VA protocol mandated the on-site nurse remain with high-risk amputee patients during severe weather power warnings. Jace sat in the living room corner, as far away from Nora as possible. He was vibrating. It wasn't anger this time. It was pure, agonizing pain. His sweatpants were soaked with perspiration. He was gripping his right thigh with both hands, his knuckles ghost white, grinding his teeth so hard Nora could hear it over the thunder. The phantom was back. And it was angry. For an amputee, phantom limb pain wasn't just imaginary. The brain was still sending signals to a foot that didn't exist, screaming that it was being crushed, burned, or twisted. Today, Jace's brain decided his right toes were being broken, one by one. Nora stood up from the sofa. "I'm getting your medication." "No," Jace rasped. The word was strained, forced out through clenched teeth. "I don't want the haze. No meds." Nora knew that response. He hated the opioids. He hated feeling drowsy. In his world, losing mental control was worse than pain. She didn't argue. She went to her bag and grabbed a container of unscented high-friction massage cream. She walked over to him and crouched down in front of his wheelchair. "What are you doing?" Jace hissed, trying to pull his leg away. "Your nerves are caught in a feedback loop," Nora said, her voice dropping to a low, commanding tone. "If you won't take the drugs, we have to overload the sensory input. I'm going to massage the residual limb. It's going to hurt, Jace. Worse before it gets better." He stared at her, his eyes wild with agony. He looked at her hands, then her eyes. He was a sniper. He was used to enduring. But this was different. He had to submit to a stranger's touch to survive it. Slowly, his hands relaxed their grip on his thigh. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes, his whole body shaking. Nora took a deep breath. She applied the cream to her hands and began. She didn't use soft, spa-like strokes. She applied deep, grinding pressure to the scar tissue and muscles of his residual stump. She was searching for trigger points, forcing the spazzing muscles to release, breaking the neurological feedback. Jace let out a sound that was half groan, half sob. His fingers dug into the rubber armrests of his wheelchair, tearing at the material. Sweat rolled down his face, dropping onto his shirt. Nora didn't stop. She didn't offer pity. She just focused on the muscle under her hands. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. She could feel the iron-hard tension beginning to melt. His breathing, previously a series of sharp, panicked gasps, began to slow. Finally, Jace's whole body went limp. The storm outside seemed to fade into the background. Nora kept up a lighter, gentler massage for another minute, allowing his nervous system to settle. Her own hands were cramping, but she didn't stop until his muscles were completely relaxed. In the quiet that followed, Jace didn't open his eyes. He remained with his head back, his face pale and exhausted. "She hated the rain," Jace whispered. The sound was so quiet, Nora almost missed it. "Sarah?" Nora guessed, referencing his wife's file name. Sarah. She used to say the rain was just God complaining. A faint, heartbreaking shadow of a smile touched his lips. "But Lily, she loves it. She used to put on those little rubber boots and splash in every puddle until her feet were blue." Nora slowly removed her hands from his leg. Jace's eyes opened. The glare was gone. The mechanic precision was absent. For the first time, he was looking at her, not through her. He saw the sweat on her own brow, the glasses foggy from the humidity, the weary but steady look in her eyes. A truce had been made. It was silent, fragile, and earned through pain. But it was there. "Get some sleep, Jace," Nora said softly. He didn't argue. He just nodded and slowly began to turn his wheelchair toward the hallway. The fragile peace lasted exactly 14 hours. By Tuesday morning, the storm had passed. The house was quiet. Nora was standing in the kitchen, washing her hands and reviewing Jace's chart. Jace was in the living room, sitting in his wheelchair near the hallway. He hadn't spoken much since the night before, but the heavy, hostile tension had dissolved into a quiet, watchful distance. Lily was playing near the bottom of the wooden staircase. "Daddy, I want the space book," Lily said. Nora looked up from the sink. The book was on a decorative shelf built into the wall beside the stairs, just out of a 5-year-old's reach. "Hold on, Lily," Jace said. He started to turn the wheels of his chair. "I'll get it." But Lily was impatient. She dragged a small, unstable wooden footstool over to the wall. She stepped onto it, stretching her little arms up toward the heavy hardcover book. The stool wobbled on the edge of the hallway rug. "Lily!" "Wait," Jace said, his voice sharpening. The stool tipped. Lily let out a sharp, terrified shriek as she lost her balance, tumbling backward toward the sharp wooden edge of the bottom stair. In that split second, Jace Carter wasn't a disabled veteran. He was a SEAL. He was a father. His brain registered the threat, calculated the distance, and fired the command to his muscles to launch himself forward and catch his daughter. He forgot about the missing leg. He pushed off the armrests with explosive force, throwing his weight forward. His left foot planted on the floor. His right leg swung down to brace for the sprint. There was nothing there. The momentum sent him pitching forward violently. His shoulder slammed into the hardwood floor with a sickening thud. The wheelchair tipped backward, crashing to the ground behind him. Before Jace even hit the floor, Nora was moving. She sprinted from the kitchen, sliding on her knees across the wood, and caught Lily around the waist just inches before the little girl's head could strike the edge of the stairs. The heavy space book fell, hitting the floor with a loud smack. Then, there was only the sound of heavy breathing. Lily burst into tears, burying her face into Nora's shoulder, her small hands clutching the fabric of Nora's scrubs. Nora held the child tightly, her heart pounding against her ribs. "I've got you," Nora whispered. "You're okay. You're okay." Slowly, Nora looked up. Jace was lying on his stomach on the floor, 3 feet away. He hadn't moved. He was staring at the space where he had tried to step, his chest heaving. "Jace?" Nora asked softly, keeping one arm around the crying child. "Are you hurt?" He didn't answer. He slowly pushed himself up onto his elbows. His face was devoid of color. The physical impact was nothing compared to what had just happened in his mind. He had tried to save his daughter, and he had fallen on his face while a stranger did it for him. The absolute, crushing humiliation in his eyes was unbearable to look at. The ironclad dignity he had fought so hard to maintain had been shattered in a matter of seconds. "Don't," Jace choked out, seeing Nora shift her weight to come help him. His voice was ragged, thick with a terrible, dark shame. "Don't touch me." He pulled himself across the floor by his arms, refusing to look at her, refusing to look at his crying daughter, dragging his broken body toward the wall. Nora remained kneeling by the stairs for a long time, holding Lily. She didn't try to go to Jace again. She knew better than to push a cornered animal, especially one whose pride was raring to go. The only sounds in the room were Lily's quiet, hiccuping sobs and the mechanical whir of Jace's wheelchair as he finally managed to drag himself back into the seat, using the wall for leverage. He refused to look at either of them. He backed his chair into the darkest corner of the living room, near the dusty prosthetic, retreating behind the wall of anger he had spent months building. The fragile connection they had made during the storm was gone, crushed under the weight of his humiliation. Nora gently stood up, holding Lily. The little girl clung to her, too afraid to look at her father, whose dark aura filled the small room. Nora carried her to the sofa and sat her down. "Stay here, Lily, just for a minute." Nora walked slowly toward Jace. She stopped 5 feet away, respecting the boundary he had clearly drawn. Jace leaned his head against the high back of his wheelchair, his eyes closed. His face was pale, except for a dark bruise already forming on his cheek where he had struck the floor. He looked exhausted, not just physically but spiritually. "Get your paper," Jace said. He didn't open his eyes. His voice was quiet, hollow, completely devoid of the sharp edge it usually carried. It was the voice of a man who had made a final, devastating decision. "Jace." "The refusal of care form," he interrupted, opening his eyes. They were cold, mechanical, tracking her with the detached precision of a sniper looking at a target. "Get it." "I'm signing it." Nora didn't move. "You know what happens if I file that paper. The VA stops your benefits. Your private insurance cancels. Jace, you won't have the money to refit the house. You won't have the support you need for Lily. They will look at this fall and file a neglect report." A flicker of absolute agony passed over his face at the mention of Lily, but it was quickly replaced by a rigid, self-destructive resilience. "I'd rather lose her than have her look at me like that," Jace whispered, glancing toward where Lily sat trembling on the sofa. Then he looked back at Nora, the dark fire returning to his eyes. I'd rather she be safe with someone who can actually catch her, not someone who gnaw on his sup mart while you play hero. Now, get the damn paper. Nora looked at him. She saw the man, the father, drowning in his own dark shame, choosing to destroy everything around him rather than let anyone see him struggle. He didn't want to heal. He wanted to vanish. Slowly, Nora reached into her bag and pulled out the clipboard with the VA refusal of care form. She didn't offer a pen. Jace ripped the clipboard from her hand. He didn't look at the text. He scribbled his signature across the bottom line, the force of the movement nearly tearing the paper. He shoved the clipboard back against her chest. "You're done," Jace said, backing his wheelchair further into the shadows. "Leave the house and don't come back." He turned his chair away from her, staring at the black, dust-covered carbon fiber of the leg he would never wear. Nora stood in the quiet room, clenching the clipboard so tightly her knuckles hurt. She looked at Lily, whose large eyes were wide with a terror no 5-year-old should ever have to feel. Without another word, Nora Hayes turned around, went to her bag, and began to pack her equipment. Nora slid the signed VA form into a manila folder, placed it inside her canvas bag, and pulled the zipper shut. The sound was loud in the suffocating silence of the house. She swung the heavy strap over her shoulder. She didn't look at Jace again. There was no point. He had built a fortress out of his own shame, and he had just locked the gate. Nora walked down the short hallway toward the front door. She reached out, her fingers wrapping around the brass doorknob. Suddenly, a small blur of motion darted past her. Lily had jumped off the sofa. Before Nora could turn the handle, the 5-year-old wedged herself between Nora and the heavy wooden door. With both hands, Lily reached up, grabbed the heavy brass deadbolt, and shoved it into the locked position with a loud Times clack. Then, she turned around and pressed her back flat against the wood, spreading her arms wide to block the exit. "Lily?" Nora said, startled, taking a step back. "Honey, you need to let me open the door." "No," Lily shouted. It wasn't a whine. It was a raw, desperate yell that echoed off the hardwood floors. Tears were finally spilling over the little girl's eyelashes, tracking down her flushed cheeks. From the shadows of the living room, Jace shifted in his wheelchair. "Lily," he commanded, his voice trembling slightly. "Move away from the door." Lily didn't look at him. She kept her eyes fixed fiercely on Nora, but her words were meant for her father. "You promised!" Lily screamed, her small chest heaving. "You promised, Daddy!" Jace froze. The mechanical whir of his wheelchair stopped entirely. "You said we were going!" Lily cried, her voice cracking as the tears came faster. She wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve, her small body shaking. "You bought me the red shoes! You said you would dance with me on Friday? You promised." The words hit the room like physical blows. Nora slowly lowered her hand from the doorknob. The pieces finally aligned into a complete heartbreaking picture. The dust on the prosthetic leg, the red shoes hidden under the sofa, the absolute panic when he fell. He hadn't been fighting physical therapy because he was stubborn. He had been fighting it because he knew he was running out of time. Friday was the school's father-daughter dance. He had promised his little girl he would walk with her, and after today's fall, he had finally convinced himself it was impossible. He wasn't angry. He was terrified of breaking his daughter's heart. Nora turned her head and looked into the living room. Jace was gripping the armrests of his chair. His head was bowed, his shoulders shaking with a quiet, devastating force. The hardened, untouchable sniper was completely gone. In his place was a father who had just been stripped of his final defense, drowning in the reality that he had failed the only person he had left. Nora looked back at Lily, who was still guarding the locked door, sobbing quietly now. Slowly, Nora let the heavy canvas bag slide off her shoulder. It hit the floor with a thud. She wasn't leaving. Nora stared at the heavy canvas bag at her feet. Then, she looked at the little girl guarding the locked door. Finally, she turned her attention back to the man in the wheelchair. She walked past Lily, stepping back into the dim living room. She didn't go to Jace. She walked straight to the dark corner and reached down. The carbon fiber prosthetic was heavy. Nora picked it up, using her sleeve to wipe away the thick layer of gray dust that had settled over the socket. She carried it across the room and stopped directly in front of Jace. She didn't hand it to him gently. She dropped it on the hardwood floor right in front of his remaining foot. It hit with a loud, hollow Times clack. Jace flinched, finally looking up. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw tight with unshed emotion. "I can't," Jace whispered. The words sounded like they were tearing his throat apart. Nora, I can't. You saw me. I couldn't even catch her. You fell because you forgot you were missing a leg, Nora said, her voice steady and completely devoid of pity. You fell because your first instinct was to launch yourself forward to protect her. That doesn't make you a failure, Jace. That makes you a father. He stared at the prosthetic leg on the floor, his chest rising and falling heavily. Friday is in 3 days, Nora continued, stepping back and crossing her arms. You can sit in that chair and let her walk into that school gym alone. Or you can pick up that hardware, put it on, and figure out how to stand. I don't care how much it hurts. You don't get to quit just because you aren't perfect anymore. From the entryway, Lily sniffled, her small hands still gripping the deadbolt. Daddy? Jace looked at his daughter. He saw her red, tear-stained cheeks. He thought about the shiny red shoes hidden under the sofa. Slowly, Jace leaned forward. His hands were shaking as he reached down and picked up the heavy prosthetic. Nora dropped to one knee beside him. She didn't take it from him. She just guided his hands. Roll up the pant leg, she instructed quietly. Let's check the silicone liner. For the next 10 minutes, the room was silent except for Nora's calm instructions and Jace's sharp intakes of breath. The sleeve was tight. The mechanical joint was stiff. When the pin finally engaged with a metallic Times click, Jace closed his eyes, bracing himself. All right, Nora said, standing up and taking a half step back. Push off the armrests. Keep your weight centered. Jace gripped the rubber armrests. His knuckles went white. He locked his jaw, let out a sharp exhale, and pushed. The pain was immediate and blinding. The socket pressed into scarred tissue that hadn't borne weight in 6 months. His breath hitched, and his left leg trembled violently under the sudden strain. But he didn't sit back down. With a final, agonizing push, Jace Carter straightened his back. He was swaying. He was breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. But he was standing. By the door, Lily let go of the lock. Her eyes were wide. You're tall again, she whispered. Jace looked down at his daughter. Tears finally broke free, tracking down his weathered face. Yeah, baby, he choked out. I'm tall again.